In only one of the many parables that Jesus tells does he ever speak of anyone going to hell. And that's in the parable we hear today. The rich man and Lazarus. The rich man who never notices the starving Lazarus at his very doorpost. And in condemning the rich man to hell, Jesus shows us just how serious is the sin of indifference. The opposite of love is not hatred. The opposite of love is indifference. To be indifferent to someone, to be indifferent to a person, is to say, in effect, to him or to her, for me, you don't exist. And this is a transgression all too many of us condone, and all too many of us find ourselves guilty of. We are not sufficiently moved by the sufferings of others, nor by the wrongs done to them. And by sufferings, I do not mean simply material sufferings, although the parable certainly alludes to those, but also emotional suffering and spiritual suffering. Note carefully exactly where Jesus places Lazarus in the parable. St. Gregory the Great, in his discussion and his assessment of this, notes that divine providence places the beggar at the rich man's very door in order to give the rich man an opportunity to minister to him. And St. John Chrysostom, in his powerful and challenging homily on this parable, states that Jesus places Lazarus, and I quote now, not in the road, not in the street, not in the alley, not in the middle of the marketplace, but at the gate of the rich man, where he had to go in and out, so that he could not say, I did not see him. I passed by and my eyes did not see him. He lies at your entrance, a pearl in the mud, and you do not see him? Did you notice the shift there? He lies at your entrance. Your entrance. You and I must open our eyes to him, to them. For our eternal salvation depends upon seeing them and helping them in whatever way we can. John Chrysostom continues, even if he is the only one, he is a human being for whom the heavens were stretched out, for whom the sun appears, for whom the moon changes, for whom the air was poured out, the springs gushed forth, the sea spread out, the prophets were sent, and the law given. He is one for whom the only begotten Son became a man. My Master was slain and poured out his blood for this man. Shall I despise him? What pardon would I have? What pardon would we have? Death is, of course, the turning point in this parable. Jesus shocks his listeners by claiming that this poor man Lazarus, this poor beggar Lazarus, is where all Jewish people hope to go, into the bosom of Abraham. Why Abraham? Why not some other hero or heroine from the Old Covenant? Why not Moses? Why not Elijah? Why not Deborah? Why not Judith? Not being Jewish, we might miss the significance here. John Chrysostom, however, reminds us when he answers, Abraham was hospitable. And so the sight of Lazarus was Abraham, who was meant to reproach a rich man for his own inhospitality. Abraham used to pursue even passers-by and drag them into his home. Whereas this rich man disregarded someone lying in his own doorway. although he had within his grasp a great treasure, such an opportunity to win salvation, the rich man ignored the poor man day after day. He could have helped him, but he failed to do so. Patriarch Abraham was not like that, but just the opposite. He would sit in his doorway and catch all who passed by. And just as a fisherman casting his net into the sea hauls in fish, yes, but also quite often gold and pearls, so also Abraham, while catching people in his net, finished by catching angels, though strangely enough, without knowing it. This Chrysostom here is obviously referring to the incident at the Oak of Mamre, which is the biblical basis for André Rublev's famous icon of the Trinity, which is also known as the hospitality of Abraham. One of the great commentators on the parables has suggested that this parable should not be entitled the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, but rather it should be entitled the parable of the 6 brothers. Why? Because for the rich man, he learned his lesson too late. But for his 5 brothers, who, while heedless and careless, according to their brother's own admission, they still have a chance, if only they would hear and not simply listen to Moses and the prophets. This then is a parable about hearing the good news and acting upon it before it is too late. It is too late for the rich man, and nothing can help him now. But it's not too late for his brothers, who have always had what they need to save them from the fate of their brother. The text tells us today, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. Better translation might be, let them hear them. For as we saw a couple weeks ago, let him or her who has ears, let them hear. This is not a rebuke. Rather, it's an invitation. An invitation to focus once again on the writings of Moses, the law, and the prophets. Jesus often gives the law a hard time, refocusing it, reinterpreting it. But in this parable, he reaffirms the substance of Jewish faith. And what is that substance? We hear it in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 4 and following. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words I command you this day shall be upon your heart. And you shall teach them diligently to your children. And you shall talk of them when you sit in your home, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. In other words, Moses and the prophets represent all of the moral law, with all of its obligations to God and to our neighbors. Those who forget this law forfeit the right of God's blessing. Those who neglect their neighbor, who fail in acts of piety and charity, not only have neglected their neighbor, but they neglect God as well. And this is not something new. It's been around from the very beginning. Jews begin their prayer every day with that phrase, Hear, O Israel. And if you and I are unimpressed by this rehearsal of God's law as presented in the parable today, then the parable is correct in saying then there's nothing that will impress us, even if someone should return from the dead. To be heedless of this is to be irresponsible, and sadly to meet the same fate as does the rich man in the parable. the story is a cautionary tale. It's not too late for us. It may be too late for the five brothers, pardon me, but it need not be for the rest of us. After all, these parables are told for our benefit. So what's the bottom line here? To use a contemporary phrase, get our act together. And get our act together now, before it's too late. Listen to the gospel. And more than listen to it, hear it. Allow it to penetrate us, so that we act upon it in whatever way you and I can. God does not expect us to do the impossible. But it does expect us to do both what we can and what we must to assist our neighbors. What God wants of us is not secrets. It's not a philosophical or metaphysical mystery. It's as clear as Moses and the prophets can make it. And you will remember that when Jesus is asked to himself put it as succinctly as possible, what does he say? He says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with your soul, your strength, and your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." In other words, all virtue, all kindness, all charity, all ethics, all obedience, all philanthropy, all duty, all love, all joy, hang on hearing these two commandments and responding to them. For they are the summary of the law and the prophets. To hear these. Once again, not simply to listen to them and say, "Oh, that's nice," but it doesn't apply to me. It applies to everyone. In whatever way we can respond to them. By whatever way you and I can live by them. To do that is life. Not to do them is death. For we're cut off from God. We're cut off from our neighbors. And then there is that great unbridgeable chasm to deal with as well. The words we hear in today's parable are words of life. And if we truly hear them, that is exactly what we will receive. Life. Both here and in the world to come.